Thank you, Bruce, for filling in for the past 2 weeks. I would say I miss it, but I also am glad I'm back. I hope you guys have been doing well over the past couple weeks in our study of Joshua. Why don't we just take a couple minutes, report in. How have the past couple Sundays gone? Nothing too out of the ordinary yet?
No.
That's good.
So I taught this class twice, but I've only taught my class once because I was out of town last weekend. Tommy Booker filled in for me. But the first week, I thought it went real well. We mostly just did background.
Sure.
So we built off of what you had together in the handout, plus I had a little bit more that I kind of added to it. And we went all the way back to the beginning of Genesis and walked through the big parts of the story, and it was kind of fun. I think the class enjoyed it because I did it kind of quiz style. Okay, what's next? And they got to tell the story, and then we kind of elaborate on some things here and there, and then spent some time in Numbers, like you had there for the story of the spies. Spent some time in Deuteronomy. And, finally came down, and we actually went all the way to the end of Joshua and talked a little bit about Joshua's speaking to the people at the end to kind of pick up the theme and kind of give some direction of where we're going for the whole class.
Yeah.
So that went well. I haven't talked to Tommy. I don't know how this last Sunday went.
Sure. I missed the first Sunday, and so I had the benefit of their recording the class I'm in, so I got to hear Jim Schuin go through that first week, and I did have to give him a little bit of a hard time because he kept bashing me and well, Bergan said this, or Bergan clearly has no idea where Joshua is because we're talking about Genesis, and so it was kind of little jokes, and so last week I had to give him a little bit of a hard time. But I know in my class, and it may just be the class I'm in, they're so used to someone getting up and lecturing for 45 minutes, but it is one of those. I think some of those questions, I don't know, I don't want to say I'm talking over their head, but it does seem like they're not quite getting there. So I've really been struggling with how to rephrase some of my questions for my class. But what else? What else have you guys experienced? And there's no wrong answers on this part.
I wasn't thrown out, so I guess it went okay.
Yeah.
Somebody did talk to me.
Well, all right. I guess if there's nothing else you guys want to share, we'll go ahead and jump into this week. I'm now noticing that I did change the week number, so this is week 3, but on the handout it still says week 2. So if it's going to bother you, go ahead and change it. I'm going to try and not change it, but it is starting to bother me now that I'm looking at it. And so this week we'll be in Joshua's chapter 3 and 4. And so the title I gave this was "The Lord Will Do Wonders Among You," and I wanted I selected this not just because it's a part of what is said in this passage, but it's specifically talking about the Lord. It's talking the Lord in the sense of Joshua is telling the people of Israel the miracles that God will do, and kind of a lot of what this week's study is going to be focusing on is this idea of telling the next generation. And so, just not as you have to do it this way, but I think it would be good for us to open up, at least in here, thinking about how do we tell the next generation about God?
We better do it explicitly.
Yeah.
Because I think there's evidence around us that a lot of people have just kind of assumed that their kids would pick it up. At least I see that as one potential explanation for what we're seeing in the attrition in the church. And so, make it a part of every day intentionally. And tell the stories. For our family, our kids were growing up at a time when we moved around a little bit. And so we were away from the rest of our family a good chunk of the time. And we were making decisions about where to go. And oftentimes it turned out that we didn't have much of a decision to make. There was one option. Well, we got to talk about that and say, this is going to be okay. And saying, God is going to be faithful. We're going to have the opportunities that we need. He's going to take care of us. I'm going to have a job. You're going to have everything you need. You're going to have a place to live. All these sorts of things. And so it can become a part of your daily conversation that you're encountering whatever you run into in life. Which is very much what's happening here. Josh was telling them there's some things going to happen. You're going to see this. And he predicts it, and then it happens. And it talks about how he was elevated in the people's eyes as being more like Moses, but what he was doing was drawing attention, as you said, to what God is doing. And that's what we try to do with our kids.
I think it goes back, Deuteronomy 6, the Shema. When are you supposed to talk about it? And it gives you a list, and it's all the time. I think that I saw a stat the other day that said something along the lines of, I think parents spend like 2.5 minutes a day in conversation, like meaningful conversation with their kids. That's, if we're not sure how we lose sight of the word, that there it is. Like, it's a call out to chest hugger. You've got to be diligent with your 7th grader and your 10th grader. They're going to be out of your house, and did you have a meaningful conversation with them? So, scary thought, but that's the case.
It's not only diligence, it's intentional.
Right. Yeah.
You think about how much time most of us spend at work. And I'm blessed now that I work almost entirely from home, so I'm around the house more. But, I remember talking with coworkers one time saying, we spend more time with each other than we do with our spouses. Just time. And so that's if kids are at school and they're out of the house, they're going and doing, they're playing sports, they're involved in other activities and so forth, how much time do you have? How are you going to use it?
Yeah. And now I actually remember where the stat came from. It was actually talking about the importance and the power of coach, and just the fact that, there's 2 hours a day I spent with 15, 16 other kids, and sometimes they're my kids, sometimes they're not, but the point is I get 2 hours a day, and now it's intentional work, but it's not always, it can be intentional conversations about other things, but that's potentially more time and energy than they may get from their parents on a given day. So that was, it was both a shot in the arm and also a kick in the rear. So for both of those.
I included this in the front page, but for me, this idea has been really lingering on my mind, partly because at my grad school, Harding School of Theology, it's their theme for the year of telling the next generation. And they keep coming back to not only how do we explain what happened in Memphis for 70 years, since now they're moving back to Arkansas for the first time since they've opened this school, and how do we shape and tell what's happened here? But more importantly, how do we take that teaching that we've been told of we're supposed to be equipping each other to tell the next generation? It's not about some school in Memphis. It's supposed to be a training in which we can go and talk about God and talk to the Lord and the things that the Lord has done. So this week, I want us to spend some time thinking about the future, how to tell the future generations not only what the Lord has done, is doing, but also will do. And so we'll go ahead and jump into our passage for this week. Could I get a volunteer who would like to read, let's see, Joshua 3, verses 1 through 13.
This, I'm reading from the New King James Version here. So Joshua 3, 1 through what?
13.
Then Joshua rose early in the morning, and they set out from Acacia Grove and came to the Jordan, he and all the children of Israel, and lodged there before they crossed over. So it was after 3 days that the officers went through the camp, and they commanded the people, saying, when you see the ark of the covenant of the Lord your God and the priests, the Levites, bearing it, then you shall set out from your place and go after it. Yet there shall be a space between you and it about 2,000 cubits by measure. Do not come near it, that you may know the way by which you must go, for you have not passed this way before. And Joshua said to the people, sanctify yourselves, for tomorrow the Lord will do wonders among you. Then Joshua spoke to the priests, saying, take up the ark of the covenant and cross over before the people. So they took up the ark of the covenant and went before the people. And the Lord said to Joshua, this day I will begin to exalt you in the sight of all Israel, that they may know that as I was with Moses, so I will be with you. You shall command the priests to bear the ark of the covenant, saying, when you have come to the edge of the water of the Jordan, you shall stand in the Jordan. So Joshua said to the children of Israel, come here and hear the words of the Lord your God. And Joshua said, by this you shall know that the living God is among you, and that he will without fail drive out from before you the Canaanites and the Hittites and the Hivites and the Perizzites and the Girgashites, the Amorites and the Jebusites. Behold, the ark of the covenant of the Lord of all the earth is crossing over before you into the Jordan. Now therefore, take for yourselves 12 men from the tribes of Israel, 1 man from every tribe. Then verse 13. And it shall come to pass, as soon as the soles of the feet of the priests who bear the ark of the Lord of all the earth, shall rest in the waters of the Jordan, that the waters of the Jordan shall be cut off, the waters that come down from upstream, and they shall stand as a heap.
All right, thank you. So what stood out to you guys just in our initial thoughts of reading this passage? What is something that you may have questions about, you may want clarification on, just in these first couple verses?
One of the main things that stands out to me is the list of nations. If you've been reading Deuteronomy, you know that list came up many times. Here it is again, just another connection. These doesn't have any great super meaning so far as I know. Sure. It's just I love to see how everything is connected and how it flows. So that's one thing that stands out.
The distance from the ark that you had to be. Also, it's interesting to me, and I don't know how far the because when the ark moves, this is just a random thought that I had, but when the ark moves, they had to be 2,000 cubits away from it. Then when it goes into the water, I don't know, are they still 2,000 cubits away?
About
You have to, or is the water backed up enough room for them to pass by without being within that
It was
radius?
I don't know.
I mean, it doesn't say.
A mile upstream, because it gives a location, and then downstream all the way to the Dead Sea, there was no water. So I mean,
So I don't know if they
widespread.
maintained that distance the
Yeah.
whole time or not.
It's like over half a mile.
Yeah.
It's a long ways.
Yeah, that's a lot of room for that water to. It's backed up. It's pretty cool. But I also, that was just a question we may never know. This day I will begin to exalt you, that they may know I will be with you, reaffirming what he told him back in chapter 1. You know, like just Joshua needs. We all need constant. We all need affirmation. Joshua keeps getting it.
Sure.
So
Well, not only Joshua, but this is a affirmation from God to the people. So like they affirmed it to Moses when the Red Sea parted. So now we're going to do it again.
Yeah.
And now we've got a transition in leadership that God's saying, Joshua's it. Go for it.
Yeah.
Associated with your theme for the day, I mean, it's obviously the Lord appears here many. The Lord your God. The Lord says, the Lord, the Lord, the Lord. Everywhere there's an emphasis on that. I mean, it's factual, but it's also, I think, intentional. I mean, we're the whole point is, even going back to Deuteronomy, was it chapter 9? Don't think that it's because you're so righteous that all these things are going to happen. No, it's because God says it's going to happen, and He chose you, and He's the one who's going to do this. We're told later in Deuteronomy when Moses is talking to Joshua and when God is talking, I'm going to fight for you. And so here again we see Joshua gets to be the mouthpiece. He's saying the words, but he's just passing on what God says. So maybe that's another thing to notice, is that he is faithful to what God has told him to do. He shares that message.
It's interesting in verse 8, he says, they didn't know the rest of the story apparently at this point, but he told the people that are carrying the ark, the priests that are carrying the ark, when you come to the Jordan, you're going to go stand still in the middle of it, or in it. He didn't say I was going to stop the water here. We know the end of the story.
Sure.
Can you imagine the faith? What? We're going to take the ark into the Jordan?
Sure, and I made some notes about that in our handout. The Jordan, at this time, it's kind of considered to be the flood season, and so it's 17 plus feet deep, where they're assuming it crossed, just because they're assuming they're not crossing closer to the Sea of Galilee, they're crossing closer to Jericho, because that's the next location they're at. But it's so 17 feet deep and about 100 feet across, which is kind of like trying to cross the Red River from Texas into Oklahoma. It's not by any means a shallow river, and it's not a very quick river to cross. And so I do think there's a point of, you're sitting there and, wait, we're supposed to be carrying this giant box in the middle of a giant river, and how are we going to do this? What is this supposed to mean? I think it's, I don't know about you guys, but I thought of the Oregon Trail video game, and how every so often you have to cross one of the great American rivers, and you have 3 options and none of them are really good. You can build a raft, you can take off the wheels, or you can just go for it on the cart, but then it's always, well, someone's going to die, or someone's something's going to break or you're going to lose your resources or whatever. And I'm sure if this is the entire nation of Israel about across this giant river, they're having a lot of those. So how do I tie everything down or carry enough to where we're not having people swept away? Because again, they don't know the whole story. Initially, it seems to be a day before Joshua even really tells them, or maybe even Joshua is told that God's going to stop up the waters of the Jordan, and you will walk across on dry land. And so that's one of the things that kind of stood out to me. But I can also talk about dry ground. But anything else from this section?
And I hadn't seen this until just now, but it said Joshua rose 3:1. He rose early. They set out from Shittim. Geography is interesting in the Bible. The only other times that place is named is in Numbers 25, and then in Micah's talking about Numbers 25. Actually, it's talking about chapters before that, but they had in Numbers 25. It's about, well, there's a lot of things going on, but Balaam and Balak is right before that. God's up protecting the people while they're down there committing sins. And in Numbers 25, they have started to take Moabite women and they've started worshiping the Baal of Peor is what it says. And then you have the zeal of Phinehas who comes in and he sticks the spear in the man and the woman, and 24,000 people die. And then the book goes on, Numbers goes on, and you get Deuteronomy. But I think they may still be in this location because the only thing they're doing is reviewing all the things that they heard at Mount Sinai and all the things, because you never really see them move on. And Joshua at the end of Numbers is appointed as the new leader. It's interesting to me that they've been sitting at this location. There's graves over there of 24,000 that have died in the plague because of their sin, and now they're about to cross over in the Promised Land. I think that is, it's interesting to me how much that plays a role in the story. But Bruce said it last week. There's no coincidences in the Bible. They don't put place names in there for no reason. They don't have to. They didn't have. He could have left that out. Joshua rose up early in the morning and they left camp. They went across the Jordan. There's no guarantee that they have to put a place name in there, but they did, and it seems to has ties to Numbers 25, and I think that's interesting because they just committed sin. And now they're going to go take the Promised Land, and what are they going to do?
I wouldn't say they just committed sin because there is time that has passed. If I'm remembering correctly, that's also when they set like a hard time on the generation of this older generation will not ever see the Promised Land.
That was back in Numbers 13 and 14, Numbers 14 specifically.
Yeah.
After the spies came back.
Oh, that's right. And I don't know what I'm talking about.
Numbers 22, and I think this is a leap forward here, but it says the sons of Israel journeyed and they camped in the plains of Moab beyond Jordan, opposite Jericho. There's this conversation. I mean, it's almost like these two places are conversing back and forth. It's like, hey, you're going to know the story of Jericho, and when you get there, you're going to remember that they just got, it's kind of that playing back and forth. But
somewhere in there, they also went up north a ways. I'd have to go back and look at it, but that when they got into the part about the different, the 2.5 tribes that staked out their claims over there, that goes further up north.
Yeah.
But they're in that Transjordan area, and if nothing else, they've at least come back to this place. And like you were saying, then Joshua rose early in the morning to set out from Shittim, and the just saying the name of that place brings the illusion, not illusion, allusion.
Oh, no.
Oh, I remember what happened there. There's a backstory here. You know, it's just one of all those connections that you see between all the stories as they pile up on top of each other to give us their meaning.
In verse 5, he says to consecrate yourselves, for tomorrow the Lord will do wonders among you. Did the people have to set themselves apart or consecrate themselves and make themselves holy so that the Lord could do the wonders? Or what was the purpose of the consecration?
I think it's a tie back to Sinai.
Is what?
A tie back to Sinai and the giving of the law. You know, where else were they supposed to prepare for 3 days? You can go directly back there, and it's the Lord is going to, in some form or fashion, be in your general vicinity. Right? He's going to come down on the mountain. Moses went up to him. People weren't supposed to even touch the mountain, you know, but they consecrated themselves before that event. Here we are, another big event in the history. Consecrate yourselves. The Lord's going to do great things. Be prepared to be in the presence of your holy God.
So does this apply to us today? Should we be consecrating ourselves whenever God is doing great things in our lives? And how would we do that? You'll have to answer it, just a rhetorical question. Sure. But I agree with you. It's recognition that God is in our lives. And it's a intentional recognition of that, as opposed to, oh, look what just happened.
Mm. It kind of goes back to some of those old church practices, like in the first couple centuries, where you were supposed to fast before you even went to church. I think it's it's a leap, but it's still some of those. We kind of have some of our practices that I'm not going to say are exactly the same, but it's that idea of there's certain things you do before you go to church, before you interact with God, to get yourself in the right mindset.
I happen to be familiar with some of the Orthodox church practices, and one of them is that they will have a Vesper service on Saturday night in preparation for partaking of the communion on Sunday.
Sure.
It's a consecration ceremony, effectively. It's pretty interesting.
Yeah. Well, I wasn't even thinking about that. I was thinking about how teachers were supposed to fast before their lesson, and then after their lesson they could eat. Or it would be one of those, if you are going to be baptized or expect to be baptizing someone, you are not to eat before, neither party is supposed to eat before you're to be baptized at least 24 hours in advance. Not saying that would become, well, probably for some, became a rule where, well, sorry, you ate 23 hours ago, so you can't get baptized for another hour. But it's one of those moments of, don't just rush into this act that God's doing and just think, yeah, God's doing this, I don't need to put any mental or personal backing behind these events. It's, no, you have to bring yourself into some form of discipline or humbleness before God, before entering. Yeah.
Well, there's some of this that might be also tied back to the in Joshua chapter 1 when we see the repetition of be strong and courageous. The second time he says be strong and very courageous, and we spent a little bit of time last Sunday talking about the difference between just hearing that as an encouragement versus it says, well, God comes back and says, didn't I command you be strong and courageous? How do you take that message differently when you're being told, I'm commanding you to be strong and courageous rather than be strong and courageous.
It's not an encouragement.
It's not encouragement.
Command.
It's a command.
It wasn't a suggestion.
No, it was not a suggestion. But part of what was said there was in verse 7, be careful to obey all the law my servant Moses gave you. Do not turn from it to the right or to the left, that you may be successful wherever you go. Keep this book of the law always on your lips. Meditate on it day and night, so that you may be careful to do everything written in it. Then you will be prosperous and successful. So some of this instruction that Joshua is now passing on to them may also be connected back to him implementing this in his own life and saying, God kind of put a condition there on us being prosperous based on our relationship with Him and how we are following what His commands are, how we're following this covenant with Him. And so now we get to chapter 3, and Joshua is saying the same thing. Consecrate yourself so God can do, or because God is about to do some amazing things through you.
Yeah.
Well, they're crossing on dry ground, but if you've ever walked out into the lake before, you keep from trying to sprain your ankle and it's going down, down, down. It's still a feat. It's dry land, but did God make it flat too?
Sure.
Because that would be, here we go, 17 feet down if we're at that point.
Yeah, carrying the ark might be a little bit easier down.
Yeah, so that's amazing. Then there was something, yes, it's dry, but what about all that
Sure.
other obstacles that you got to walk across to get across this dry land?
Especially because then he commands, go collect. They build 2 monuments in chapter 4, and so they're probably collecting 24 stones and not just 12. One's going to be stay in the middle of the river, but you now need to take these stones from the bottom of the river all the way up. And I'm not a Hebrew expert, but I've heard it said once, and so I'm going to say it again. If it's proven wrong, I can't be held responsible for it because I didn't do my homework, and it can't prove it wrong. But the word, I guess, is not some small stone. It's not a pebble. It's not a rock that you can put in your pocket or in a bag. It's stones like boulders, or not boulders.
If they're going to be there to this day,
Yeah, it's going to be.
type of thing.
It's memorial.
It's a
needs to
memorial
stay put.
Yeah, and so it's not just, oh yeah, we found this rock on this trail, we're going to put it over here. No, these are stones big enough to leave a memorial. But why don't I'll go ahead and finish off chapter 3. So starting in verse 14. So when the people set out from their tents to pass over the Jordan, with the priest bearing the Ark of the Covenant before the people, and as soon as those bearing the ark had come as far as the Jordan, and the feet of the priests bearing the ark were dipped in the brink of the water, now the Jordan overflows its banks throughout the time of the harvest. The waters coming down from above stood and rose up in a heap very far away. At Adam, the city besides Zarethan, and those flowing down toward the sea of Arabah, the salt sea, were completely cut off. And the people passed over opposite Jericho. Now the priest bearing the ark of the covenant of the Lord stood firmly on dry ground in the midst of the Jordan. And all of Israel was passing over on dry ground until the nation finished passing over the Jordan. I think we've kind of hit most of this, talking about the size of the Jordan, where exactly they pass over, crossing over on dry ground. But I don't want to cut anyone short. Was there anything from these verses that stood out to you guys before we jump to chapter 4?
Well, you mentioned it in your notes, the difference between this and the Red Sea.
Sure.
The Red Sea, they stood back. Moses lifted his rod, the waters parted, then they went through. In this case, he said, take off.
Yeah.
Walk into that water. It was more of an act of faith this time than last time.
Yeah.
Because the water had not parted yet. The ground was not dry yet. But they were told to start marching.
Sure.
So this demonstrated more of an act of faith than the time when they went through the Red Sea.
Yeah.
I'm also thinking back to the Reubenites, Gadites, and half tribe of Manasseh who said they were going to lead the people into the land. There's some tension here. We're going to see in chapter 4 they did.
Mm-hmm.
But right now, in the first telling of the crossing, it doesn't talk about that. So that's one thing that I was thinking as I was reading it earlier.
Sure.
And then I was reminded, oh yeah, chapter 4, they did. But, there's a little tension there.
Well, all right. Let's go ahead. If one of you would like to volunteer and read chapter 4, verses 1 through 7. We'll go ahead and jump into there.
When all the nation had finished passing over the Jordan, the Lord said to Joshua, "Take 12 men from the people, from each tribe a man, and command them, saying, Take 12 stones from here out of the midst of the Jordan, from the very place where the priest's feet stood firmly, and bring them over with you, and lay them down in the place where you lodge tonight." Then Joshua called the 12 men from the people of Israel, whom he had appointed, a man from each tribe. And Joshua said to them, "Pass on before the ark of the Lord your God in the midst of the Jordan, and take up each you a stone upon a shoulder, according to the number of the tribes of the people of Israel, that this may be a sign among you, when your children ask in time to come, What do these stones mean to you? Then you should tell them that the waters of the Jordan were cut off before the ark of the covenant of the Lord. When it passed over the Jordan, the waters of the Jordan were cut off. So these stones should be to the people of Israel a memorial forever."
Thank you. So before we start thinking about what all came out of here, I want us to spend some time in those last couple verses about these instructions about the memorial. I want us to think about what are some of the memorials we establish in our lives, in our churches, or things we put up to remind people about the things God has done.
We did the bricks not very long ago.
Yeah.
The communion table is always, I grew up with that. This do in remembrance of me. I assumed it was scriptural. You have to have the table and the writing on it. So communion obviously is just in general, but
We don't do nearly as much of that. I think part of it is reactionary against first the Catholic Church and other groups on down. And so we tend to be very narrow in our rites and rituals, which is kind of unfortunate. I understand how things went wrong with some other groups, but having those visual reminders, even as we look around the building or whatever the case may be, can be very helpful.
Sure.
But we don't have nearly as much of that.
I think a lot of times we don't look at them like stones, but they are. You'll put up a picture of somebody who donated something, or secularly we'll have that, or even at the university, you'll have a building dedicated to someone, or in terms of historical monuments, you drive around the Texas highways and you'll see, somebody slept here, kind of an idea. So it's a memory of something happened that was supposedly significant to somebody. And you asked me a good question. I can't remember any real things other than I walk into the church building where I go right now. There's a picture of a man who helped build the building. he used to be a member there. It was obviously in memory of him. And so those kinds of things are there. But I think for us, our stones happen to be the influences that we have on the people around us.
Mhm.
Sort of like 1 Peter chapter 2 reminds me of that. The living stones remind me of this passage, or the other way around, where we're supposed to be markers for God. This is what happened in my life. And I tell my daughters and my sons, and this is how God's working in my life. So this is passing on the next generation story.
Sure.
I think he mentioned it earlier, but do this in memory of me, so that's something we do every week. It's a memorial, but it's not a stone, you know.
One of my sisters actually has a basket that she has set on a table right beside her door, and it has rocks in it on which she has painted things that are meaningful to her in her life, which is an interesting, every time she passes it, I'm sure she thinks about it. Every time I go over there and I pass by it, I see it, I think about it. I can imagine other people coming into her home, seeing it, and maybe even being a conversation starter. But she specifically tried to put some sort of visual reminder in her house
Sure.
to help her remember things like that.
You said something really important. It's a conversation starter. That's why it might be important for us to have those stones.
Yeah.
Well, many of us probably do have scripture of some sort posted on a wall or a wall hanging of some sort in our homes or offices, business places of business, perhaps even. So that might qualify in this conversation also as a monument.
Yeah.
My daughter was walking to, I don't know if you know my daughter, her name is Jeannie Mae. She's a little Chinese girl that runs around here in the college class. And she was wearing a jacket or something that had Matthew 5:14 in it. And it was a conversation starter just a few days ago with some people there on campus. So it's a good point.
Jess Peterson taught our class one time, and they gave all of us a little frog about that big. I still have it on my desk at work, and I look at it and think of how God delivered the people from Egypt, you know, just a little frog. I know that's not a...
Well, it's the same kind of thing, right? I remember I used to worship in Rio Rancho, New Mexico. The minister there, I still have this, it's been 25 or 30 years. And it's 2 links of a chain. And every time I get it and I look at it, it reminds me of my responsibility. I might be the only link to somebody else's salvation. That's a stone.
Just don't go worshiping the frog. You're all right.
You what?
Just don't go worshiping the frog, and you're all right.
Oh, yeah.
You know,
no, I'm not-
I mean that's the problem that
Yeah.
came up in the
Yeah.
Catholic churches and so forth, is that they begin to venerate
That's right.
objects and
No, he delivered it in the right
yeah.
way.
So but we're seeing how powerful these kinds of things are. They're memorable. They stay with us. They remind us.
Yeah.
It'd be good to have more of those.
Sure. All right, let's go ahead and finish out chapter 4. Would someone like to finish reading, or if not, I can.
And the people of Israel did just as Joshua commanded, and took up 12 stones out of the midst of the Jordan, according to the number of the tribes of the people of Israel, just as the Lord told Joshua. And they carried them over with them to the place where they lodged, and laid them down there. And Joshua set up 12 stones in the midst of the Jordan, in the place where the feet of the priests bearing the ark of the covenant had stood. And they are there to this day. For the priest bearing the ark stood in the midst of the Jordan until everything was finished that the Lord commanded Joshua to tell the people, according to all that Moses had commanded Joshua. The people passed over in haste. And when all the people had finished passing over, the ark of the Lord and the priest passed over before the people. The sons of Reuben and the sons of Gad and the half-tribe of Manasseh passed over armed before the people of Israel, as Moses had told them. About 40,000, ready for war, passed over before the Lord for battle to the plains of Jericho. On that day the Lord exalted Joshua in the sight of all Israel, and they stood in awe of him just as they had stood in awe of Moses all the days of his life. And the Lord said to Joshua, "Command the priests bearing the ark of the testimony to come up out of the Jordan." So Joshua commanded the priests, "Come up out of the Jordan." And when the priests bearing the ark of the covenant of the Lord came up from the midst of the Jordan, and the soles of the priests' feet were lifted up on dry ground, the waters of the Jordan returned to their place and overflowed all its banks, as before. The people came up out of the Jordan on the 10th day of the first month, and they encamped at Gilgal on the east side of Jericho. And those 12 stones which they took up out of the Jordan, Joshua set up at Gilgal. And he said to the people of Israel, "When your children ask their fathers in times to come, what do these stones mean? Then you shall let your children know, Israel passed over this Jordan on dry ground. For the Lord your God dried up the waters of the Jordan for you until you passed over, as the Lord your God did to the Red Sea, which he dried up for us until we passed over. So that all the peoples of the earth may know that the hand of the Lord is mighty, that you may fear the Lord your God forever."
All right. What else that we haven't had a chance to talk about, did you guys notice in chapter 4? And if not, I have closing thoughts. I can probably go 10 minutes.
Verse 14, on that day the Lord exalted Joshua in the sight of Israel. Said he was going to, and he did. Right? Nothing that God has said has not come to pass. He said he was going to exalt Joshua, and he did.
Verse 10 is similar. Until everything was finished, that the Lord commanded Joshua to tell the people, according to all that Moses had commanded Joshua. We've got the entire linkage there, right? We've got Moses as the leader in times past who listened to God, spoke to the people on God's behalf. You have him who charged Joshua. We have the Lord who charged Joshua. We have all of it bundled up, going just as it was supposed to go.
You brought up the dry land. There's no accident of, well, there was this earthquake that happened and the water was diverted for a while. No. I remember as a kid, I was kind of excited. Because on TV, they were going to have Mysteries of the Bible or something like that. It was from the late 70s. And started watching, and it was talking about the children of Israel crossing the Red Sea. And I thought it'd be biblically based. Well, no. Well, there must have been this wind that was blowing a certain way. And this seismic event happened this way. And yeah, okay.
Sure.
I think also this kind of sets the stage when we look back with Rahab. She said that we saw that God led you across on dry land, and now as this is setting the stage to go and conquer Jericho, they get to see this again in closer proximity to where they are, and maybe also contributes to why the people of Jericho did not come out to fight, but they just closed themselves up inside the walls of the city out of fear.
Yeah. Where are all the people of Gilgal when they showed up there? I mean, that's where they encamped, just to the east of Jericho, east border of Jericho in Gilgal. I think maybe they all ran inside the gates. I mean, they can see the people, 40,000 armed men crossing the river, going to be noticeable, right? Plus everybody else who's coming with them.
1 million or so more behind them.
You know, yeah, we better not stay here.
The river piling up on one side.
All this is visible.
Yeah.
And so, right at the end, why did all this happen? Two reasons, right? They're related, but the two reasons. So that all the people of the earth may know that the hand of the Lord is mighty. And, I mean, there's not an and there, comma, that you may fear the Lord your God forever.
Sure. Well, that kind of leads me into, I guess, this week's, I don't know what I'm calling this yet. I guess example of choosing this day whom you will serve. We didn't do that. We didn't do it the first week because that was just introduction. I don't know how much you talked about it last week with Rahab, but it was one of those. I want to try and pull out each week an example of people having the choice whether to follow God or have faith in God or something else. And I think this week it's not one person. Like later on, we'll see. Well, they had the choice between greed or following God, and they clearly chose greed, or they did this, and so they were cursed or blessed or whatever. But this week, it's going back to the idea of they have to have faith in the Lord, because it's not like when they crossed the Red Sea where Moses was out ahead of them, and Moses called down this or raised his staff, and the seas parted, and then they went. They were told, no, go start following the Ark of the Covenant, and eventually God will make his presence known. And again, I may be reading way too much between the lines, but just having human nature, it's one of those, surely there's someone who's thinking, this is a stupid idea. How are we supposed to walk through the middle of the river? And sure, they could have been told the story of the parting of the Red Sea thousands of times. At this point, there's not that many Bible stories that they've been told in the desert. And so it's one of those, yeah, they've heard the story of how God led them out of Egypt. But, well, that was my parents and grandparents, and I'm now an adult, and I've never seen anything like that happen. We've just been stuck in the desert for all I know. Now we're being led and told to cross this river. I don't, there's that part of me that doubts, that has fear. And so I think that this week's, I guess, choice is to give in to doubt and to fear, or to have faith in God. And so I kind of tried to outline how to talk about that, but I don't know if that's how you guys, if maybe you guys could find a better way or a different way that might work for your classes. I also, this is a tangent of all tangents. I did put a footnote in there, kind of leading us down that rabbit hole. And this is just kind of my personal thoughts that I've been kind of kicking around recently, of this idea of inherited faith. I don't know exactly when. All I know is around the time I started in the youth group, I kept hearing people talking to my parents about, well, you need to make sure Bergan doesn't just inherit his faith. And I'm sure there's some good, like, backgrounds to, yeah, well, I don't want to just say this is my parents' faith, and so I'm just going to blindly do what my parents do. Because then I'm not building my own relationship with God, I'm not doing anything like that. But I think at times those conversations led us to a point where we have stopped passing down the faith in some of our families. Not necessarily in the fact of to cast shame on anyone, but it's one of those, we don't pass along our faith unless they're being taught by us, like specifically. I may be going way off, and you guys may have stopped following me, but it's that idea of, I don't know if Jimmy is necessarily passing on his faith to anyone outside of his kids and the people he teaches. I'm not saying you don't, but it's one of those, it's still one of those, we should be passing on our faith to our congregations and to everyone, so the next generation might know. It's not one of those things where it's my family is going to hear about my faith and that's it. Because really our churches are strengthened by the testimonies of faith from all of the members, not just the ones that get to stand up on Sunday mornings and do a communion thought or teach Bible class or teach children's time or do the sermon or whatever. It's strengthened by Jimmy passing on his faith to Robert, and Robert passing on his faith to Chess, and Chess passing on his faith to the people he sees at work, and passing on that faith into other groups. And it's actually how trickle-down economics is supposed to work, but it's trickle-down economics with our faith. And so I don't know if any of that led you guys to have any thoughts or comments, but
Well, that does remind me, I was blessed to grow up in a Christian household where the first thing I got was a Christian worldview.
sure.
And so I've encountered other things since then, of course, but I didn't have to have a worldly worldview corrected out of me. I just had to defend against it from the very beginning, and that's a blessing.
Sure.
And I had 3 or 4 other sets of parents in my church, where when I went to their house, I heard a lot of the same things I was hearing from my parents, and that was of great benefit to me. But it was overt. It was talked about. It was intentional.
Sure.
But I think to piggyback off of that, I think part of the struggle for us as we live in America, 21st century or whatever we're in now, and everything is individualized, and so that idea, I mean, I've heard it too. You got to make your faith your own, so forth, and some of that is just I don't want to say hogwash. It's not great. Church and faith is always intended to be corporate. It's intended to be done together. And
How did I get my faith? It was because multiple people, not just my family.
If it is the most important thing that we can pass on, there's zero reason for me not to impress that upon my children, right? Going back to the Shema, I mean, like, I should be doing this daily, and I should be doing this intentionally, and I shouldn't just be doing it with my own children. I should be doing it with the neighbor kid down the street that's always at my house. I should be doing it, I should be a parent to multiple kids, and I'm hopeful that, I'm thankful that my kids are surrounded by multiple people that are going to impress the faith upon them, because they're going to have to step out into the real world and make their own decisions. And how do they make those decisions is going to be based on the worldview that they're carrying. I'm not leaving that up to chance if I can help it.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you guys. I hope you guys were able to find some benefit from this evening. I hope that Sunday morning goes well for you guys. If there's anything that comes up between now and Sunday, don't be afraid to ask me. Thank you guys. Have a good week.